This would be Steve.
There we go.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming out today. I think my dad would have been impressed. He had that big personality, and I don't know if the restaurant business, I don't know if he came to that personality from all the years in the restaurant business, or maybe that big personality was what made him be successful in the restaurant business, but certainly he had it. And at Evans, he was out front or in the bar, and most of Mount Prospect knew who he was. He was always running into people that we knew. I mean, we'd be up in Wisconsin and he'd see some guy. You know, we'd spend a half hour just visiting. We used to go to people's houses. I mean, I'll never forget Chuck Mertz's slideshow. It seemed to go on forever. We vacationed with his customers. He just was able to develop this bond with pretty much everybody that he came across with. And I'll share a Greek piano story with you. So in the mid-late 80s, I had met Colette Schroeder. And in a totally random connection, Colette knew my dad. She worked at the bank right next door to Evans that the business used for all their banking needs, right? And at one point, she was trying to teach my dad how to use this new cash register that would read the credit cards. And my dad had no interest in that. He liked the ka-chunk thing where you make the imprints with the credit card. He liked that big gold cash register that you would always see in the back of the bar. In fact, when he sold New Frontier in 1994, and random thought, it was the day of the OJ Bronco chase at the bar, because we were there with some friends just to kind of see the place out. He still had that cash register sitting back there. But, you know, getting back to Colette, when her husband passed away, you know, I shared the news with my dad. My dad knew Clarence as well. And my dad reminisced about how he used to meet his wife for dinner there after her shift ended at work. And Clarence would show up a little early and he'd sit down and he'd enjoy a cocktail by himself. And he's telling me this whole story, and you know, he even remembered what cocktail Clarence enjoyed. Wow. That was just the way that my dad was at the business with all the people that he came across. Like I said, it was just a totally random connection. With that said, though, there was only 3 of us that knew what he was like as a dad. And when you're a kid, it's kind of all about you, and maybe you don't really recognize it at the time. But when I was older, I realized just how generous he was with his time. You know, he must have been at Evans 70, 80 hours a week. I don't know. And it was such a big part of our lives. We would go there for dinner, and if it wasn't a school night, I would end up staying with him until he closed the place. I mean, I was totally content spending 2, 3, 4 hours just sitting in the restaurant, right? I didn't have a phone to scroll through. I didn't have anything like that. Just, it was fun to just hang out. And at the end of the day, we would go into the office, and I had no idea what he was doing. There was a picture of the presidents on the wall. I used to look at the picture of the presidents as he did whatever he was doing, counting the money, sorting it, putting it here, filling out that paperwork, doing that, whatever, right? I used to like to hang out in the kitchen. And Theo Forti and Spiro, I mean, I probably bugged them to the point where they just wanted me to just go away. But they were always so gracious to me. They used to have me go fetch stuff for them out of the freezer, which was a thrill. I'm not quite sure why. But, you know, getting back to the generosity with his time, you know, I can only imagine what would go through his head when I would hit him up and say, hey, Dad, can you take us to a Hawks game? I'm sure the last thing he wanted to do was get in the car in the dead of winter and drive down to the west side of Chicago and sit through a hockey game. But he always said yes. Sitting in the parking lot afterwards, it was always kind of a crapshoot as to whether the car would even start, so we could always get back home. But eventually he'd get the car started and then we'd go home. There was one time I remember where he had the opportunity to get Notre Dame football tickets, which at the time seemed like something I wanted to do. He could have said no and I never would have been the wiser, but he said yes, he got tickets, and he ended up taking my cousin Jim and I to the game. So here's this guy who, like I said, 70, 80 hours a week. He's sitting in the car driving 2.5 hours to South Bend, sitting through a football game that he has absolutely no interest in, and driving back 2.5 hours just so that he could do that for us. And when I got older, I acknowledged to him that at the time I didn't quite get it, but you know, I appreciate all that stuff that he had done. And he was like, you know, yeah, so what? You know, that was just the way that he was. I think the day that I got my driver's license was probably one of the happiest days of his life, because he knew that he would never again have to drive down to 1800 West Madison. At some point, though, my dad made the transition from father to grandfather, and he did that seamlessly. You know, just on my side of the family, he was a grandpa to 5, and it didn't matter who the grandkids were. He treated them all the same. He loved them all. He was always around family. He came from a big fat Greek family, and he married into a big fat Italian family. So there was always family around, and that was just the way that he wanted it. And you know, in the end, it got very difficult, and you know, it didn't end the way that I wanted it to end. But you know, I take a lot of solace from the fact that he lived a long, happy life. He had a long, happy retirement. I'll always be thankful to Carol for, you know, allowing that to happen. I know how much he loved her, and she was the best thing that ever happened to him. The last few years were a struggle for him physically, but he never once complained to me. He never talked about the things that he could no longer do. He would tell me about the things that he could still do. And that's how I'm going to remember him, as a very happy man who always had a smile on his face. Thank you.